Well, welcome back. Can you believe it's week 6 already? And we have been so glad to have you join us and hope your small group has been a great experience for you. As we kind of conclude this week, I want to make sure you do a couple things. Make sure you spend some time celebrating as a group what this 6 week has meant to you, what God has done in your group and in your life this 6 weeks. And then also spend a little bit of time talking about what you're going to do next. Just don't let your group just kind of fade into the sunset at the end of the 6 weeks. But hopefully there's a follow-up plan and you guys have some next steps as well.
All right, you've had 5 weeks worth of practice. It's time to worship. We want to hear you, even though it's on video and there's no way we can actually hear you. We want to hear you and your group worship now as the Heartland team leads us.
Before I ever cry, you answer me from where the thunder hides. I can't outrun this heart I'm tethered to. With every step I collide with you. Like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce, you cannot fail. The only thing I found is through it all, you never let me down. You don't hold back, relentless in pursuit. At every turn, I come face to face with you. Oh, like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't escape, tearing through the atmosphere. Your love is fierce. Lord, you surround me. You chase me down. You seek me out. How could I be lost when you have called me found? You chase me down, you seek me out. How could I be lost when you have called me found? You chase me down, you seek me out. How could I be lost when you have called me found? Like a tidal wave crashing over me, rushing in to meet me here. Your love is fierce, like a hurricane that I can't
Well, again, as these guys have said, man, 6 weeks together has been so much fun. And so thankful for those of you who have been a part of this with us. Have you had fun as a part of this experience? It's been great. You know, as we wrap things up this week, I was thinking, you know, when you were a kid, who'd you want to be like? We've all had role models, right? I mean, we've had people that we looked up to, heroes that we watched, thinking, man, you know, if I could only be like them. At different seasons, different kinds of people stand out to us. You know, for example, as a grade school kid, my hero was Larry Bird. He played college basketball in my hometown, and I just remember watching him, especially when he played for the Boston Celtics through the 80s. He had me practicing like last-second shots in the driveway most afternoons. Who did you want to be like? A star athlete, an actor or an actress, a musician? Maybe it was a coach or a teacher or your best friend's dad. Now, when we get older, most of us drop that childish ambition of being like athletes and actresses, but we still look around us and we look for someone who's worth emulating. Yeah. We think, man, you know, if I could just be like them. Now, here's another question. What do you think God is like? A.W. Tozer, he was a thoughtful pastor and a writer in the earlier part of the 20th century. He once said, the most important thing about you is what you think about God. That statement is so compelling to me. The most important thing about you is what you think about God. Our idea of what God is like, it shapes everything about how we experience life. You know, when I was first starting out my faith, my image of who God was had lots of different versions. For example, like just right out of the gate, I thought that God was like an undertaker, you know? I mean, like that was my image of God. He was the guy that was just called to the scene in the unfortunate case that someone died, and I wasn't too interested in that. So I was like, don't bring that guy around. Or maybe if you're honest, you think of God and you think of him as an angry judge. Yeah. He's just like this cop who's patrolling the streets of life, just waiting for you to screw up so that he can flip on the blue lights and remind you that you've missed the mark. What do you think about when you think about God? What image comes to mind? How did you view him growing up? How do you see him now? And as we talked about just this past weekend, at the very core, what we've all got to wrestle with, and the conclusion that I hope you can come to, is that God is actually a grace giver. That's who he is. Yeah. Arms open wide, ready, willing, hoping through your surrendered humility that he can give you a second chance. You want to know what God's like? Is he an angry old man? Is he a gavel-pounding judge? If you really want to know, look no further than Jesus. Jesus himself said, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. He's saying, you want to know what God's really like? Eyes on me. And Jesus came to give grace to you, to restore a broken relationship with people like us. Now, you may be sitting right where you're at right now, and you've been listening for 6 weeks, and you've been considering all the things that we've been talking about, and you've thought to yourself, all great ideas, but I think I'm too far gone. I've drifted too far. What you got to wrestle with this year is that's not who God is. He's a grace giver. He wants to redeem and restore you. You know, one of my very favorite things to do in life is to sneak into my kids' bedrooms late at night and just cuddle with them while they're sleeping. I love to just lay there. Anybody else do this? And just listen to them breathe. And I often lay there and I think to myself, this kid, I mean, he has no idea, she has no idea how much I love him, how much I love her. And I watch their little faith and I feel the warmth of my son's stinky breath up against me. And I watch his chest rise and fall. And I think, you know, whether it's my daughter Abby or my son Andrew, there's nothing that they could do to make me love them anymore. In fact, isn't it true? It's just the opposite. I mean, like every day there's like half a dozen things that my kids do to interrupt and complicate my life. If it was a matter of deserving my love, well, they got another thing coming. But the very fact that Abby is my little girl, the very fact that Andrew is my son, it just mysteriously sets off everything else. And that's grace. That's what we've learned about this past weekend, what we learned about this session, is that grace is this undeserved, mysterious, irrational, radical, unconditional, relentless love of a Father who's rich in mercy. That's who he is. Yeah. And the cool thing is he doesn't save us by anything that we do. In fact, it's just the opposite. He saves us by everything that he has done. Jesus went to the cross for you. I just need to talk about this for a minute. And he took the penalty for all of our shortcomings, all of our failures, all of our sin. And as a result, you and me, we get a second chance. We get a do-over. And that grace, no matter how far gone you think you are, that grace will reach into the lowest, worst mistake. It'll run further than anything, any place you could ever possibly run away to. It doesn't just forgive your sins, but it washes away the guilt and the shame that consumes you. And get this, this is cool. Grace is not just a second chance for an eternity someday out there. Grace is not just something for making things right in that someday in the clouds. You and me, we're given grace right here, right now, so that we can follow the path of Jesus no matter what circumstances come, no matter what stuff happens in your life. And we get to be a grace giver in this world too. See, God's grace isn't just something that saves you from something, it saves you for something. And as we've been learning from Romans 8:28, we get to act according to his good purpose. And when we've been saved by grace, that's what we get to do. There's nothing that you and I can do to earn God's grace, but there is something. There is something that we can do in response to it.
One of the interesting things about the Bible is in the book of Ephesians, it says this. It says, you are God's masterpiece. And the word that they use there, the Greek word, actually is the word where we get poem from. Your work of art. And when you've experienced the grace of Jesus in your life, and when you're walking in that every day, when your life gets a reboot and you get new leadership and new pathways of purpose and significance, your heart begins to beat like God's heart. And you become a giver of grace too. I like to think of it in terms of this. Grace makes us into a water hose. Sometimes we're a pitcher and we just hold it and contain it just for ourselves. But we're never meant to be that. God gives us grace so that it might go through us to other people. And that's the thing that the world that we live in is hungry for, is some folks who are actually living like grace is a thing that can be given away and not just something to own and to hoard. So what I'd love to hear from you all is this. Talk about a time when you received grace, but also talk about a time when you were able to give it away to somebody else, to be a grace receiver and also a grace giver. Do you have a story of that you would want to share with us?
That's great.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I went to a very traditional church. And one of the things that when I was like really little, I always pictured Jesus as what my pastor looked like, because he preached from the pulpit that Jesus said this, and so when he said it, I was like, oh, that's what Jesus looks like. All right. I always thought of him as that old man, as that person that just tells you the really nice things that you need to hear and the wise things. And I never doubted that God had wise things to say, but I think it wasn't until I really began to understand who he was in my life, and I began to grow in that I realized that he was more like the no-nonsense best friend that will tell you like it is, but also does it out of a loving heart and knows that's where you're supposed to be. And so like when I've made mistakes in my life, I look to God now as that person that I know loves and cares for me with every inch of their being, but will also tell me the truth in a way that sometimes hurts to have to hear. And it's cool that it's changed from the old man to the best friend.
That's great. That's really great.
Thank you. Over here.
So I think my story is kind of unique in the sense that I think I've had a ton of grace water-hosed, waterboarded onto me, if that's appropriate. But just in the sense that, growing up, I grew up in a very strict household with religion. So God to me was very much the judge, and it was a checklist, and I was always racing to do the right thing or, not do the right thing but not get caught, because then I didn't get caught. So fast forward, my life has not always been the straight and narrow. I've kind of taken lots of detours and roller coasters, and the cool thing in the grace piece is I have my life and I have my story and I have my mistakes. and they were big, and some were small, but some were big. But God met me where I was, broken. I mean, I think the first thing I said to Josh when we first kind of started to meet, I go, "You don't want to talk to me, I'm crazy." And I think I legit meant it. Like, I didn't. But, like, God met me there in my crazy, lunatic, like, whoa, life is not all that it's supposed to be. And God loved me, and he accepted me, and he poured all these people who came along and accepted me and gave me the grace. But now the cool thing is I have that messed up background and the things that I hope never surface. And if they do, I'll just have to deal with it, right? Because you're like, oh, that was embarrassing. But the thing is, I feel like I can relate to different people now because God allowed me to mess up so much, and he didn't judge me. He accepted me for who I am. And now when I meet people in their different places, it's been fun because I'm like, welcome to the club, kid. Because it's kind of how I was accepted. So I had tons of grace given, but I get to give it back. And I think that's kind of the fun part, is that it's not about what I think, because God loved me for who I am.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, thank you. Who else?
My story's a little bit different. I grew up completely outside of the church. We never attended. So one morning I woke up feeling a little empty inside, wondering what's missing. I have things going for me. I have a great life on paper, but I feel a little unfulfilled on the inside. And, you know, I started searching inside of me, and I realized that maybe it was God. Maybe it was this person that everybody's talking about. And, you know, I was able to dig into that. And, you know, I've now been a believer of Jesus for a little over a year now, 14 months. And it's completely transformed my life and everybody around me as well. I am so much stronger of a person now than I ever thought I could be. I've brought my family and my friends to also know Jesus. We are regularly engaged in activities together. I notice a difference in the way I speak to others. Things are just so different for me now that really there's no explanation other than God's hand in it.
Yeah, a great story. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, I'm Jose. My story's basically over my whole life. I've made a lot of mistakes, and with failed relationships, and more so my drinking got in the way of a lot of stuff, and it got me in trouble with the law as well on 2 separate occasions. With that, I just felt that there was something more, or something other than just this being my everyday life. And it just took that one question. I mean, I was mowing the lawn and I just stopped, and all I had to do was ask. I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't attending at church at that time, but I asked for his help. And since that, I mean, I didn't go to any meetings. It was just overnight. I just stopped drinking. I didn't have the urge for it. And because of his grace, I'm close to 4 years now of being sober.
That's awesome.
And with that grace, it changed my life into the man that I am now. And I'm a better father to my little girl. So I'm forever grateful for that.
That's awesome. Great story. Way to go.
That's great. Thank you.
Maybe one more.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in a household where religion was talked about a lot. It took a long time for me to get to the point where I was thinking I wasn't in control. I wasn't in control of my life. Met my wife in college. We got engaged, and her parents just were amazing with the grace that they extended to me, knowing that I wasn't a Christian, just really asking if I was going to love and take care of their daughter and if I believed in God, leaving the rest of it up to God at that point. Rolling ahead 15 years later, started attending Heartland, started attending a men's group, really just seeing what I was missing and where God was going to take me. Knowing that our kids needed something more, needed a father who was going to lead them. It still took me a while to get there. One day, April 2001, communion service. I was just praying and just really decided at that point that I was ready to accept Christ. Looked down the aisle and told my wife I took communion. She didn't quite get it at that point that I had accepted Christ. But just the people around me, the people in my men's group, my family, just the grace that they gave me to allow me to do it in my own time. But then to realize and look back later to realize how much time I had actually lost by not making that decision earlier is a regret of mine. But it's been a great ride. I've really changed significantly since that point. Even the people at where I worked at the time saw a significant change in me over the few months of after I made the decision to follow Christ. And just the example and the ability to be able to talk about that more was extremely impactful to me and those that I worked with.
Yeah, that's great, Jeff. Thanks. What a great story.
Great. Thanks.
You know, we talk a lot around here that really the central part of who we are is a place where people can find and follow Jesus. No matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what your story is, no matter what stuff is happening in your life right now, there is always an opportunity for you to come racing home, and you will find there a loving Heavenly Father, a grace-giving Father who has arms wide open, ready to accept you just as you are, but also ready to challenge you to become the person that He really desires for you to be. And it's my heartfelt prayer that as you're talking in your group now and wrapping up this final week of this series, that you guys would have a really great time understanding even more clearly who this God is. The most important thing about you is what you think about God. We look forward to continuing to see you here on the weekends at Heartland.